So my name is Mike Brummel, and I've been doing NAV for the last 20 years. For the last 11 years, Microsoft has awarded me with the MVP award. I co-founded the Dutch Dynamics community, was co-initiator of Partner Ready Software, which doesn't exist anymore. I'm the vice chair of the credentialing committee and Dynamics Pro. I'm very proud to be a NAVAG All-Star, founder of NAV Skills, founder of the Dynamics App Alliance. I wrote 3 books about NAV, and I think you can short it by saying that I'm a community freak and a huge fan of simplicity. So Dynamics 365 for Financials is the official product name that Microsoft gave Project Madeira, which is the SaaS offering for Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2017. And this webinar is part of a series around financials, which is the short name of the product that I will use. Today we will provide a helicopter view of, and the future webinars will deep dive into the components of the financials application and development platform. So let's start talking about financials apps. To build an app for financials, you basically need 2 components. Of course, you need someone with an idea, and as always, Dilbert is correct, and building an app is more than typing a few lines of code, so maybe you need some help and assistance as well. The information provided in this webinar is based on real-life experiences from the companies that we have helped and companies that were there during the TAP program. And those companies were kind enough to share experiences with us. If you go to AppSource, which we will do in a second during a demo, you can see that currently we have 11 apps registered in AppSource. But I can guarantee you that there's many, many more currently in development. And after the TAP program has closed and the official program has been released, Microsoft has already received more than 100 applications for apps. So it's definitely something that is on the top of a lot of people's mind right now. So when I do training for building apps for AppSource, like I did last Friday not far from where I live, most of the people that are in my training expect that I will talk the majority of the time about technical challenges. They expect me to talk about PowerShell or extensions, Delta files, or leveraging events. And I've even had people asking me, Mark, should I wait for the new development environment in Visual Studio because maybe it will be easier to build apps when that is there. But I think if you focus too much on a technical challenge, and especially if you wait for the new development environment, which will only be in preview in the next couple of weeks, and it will take a considerable amount of time before Microsoft will finish that. I think if you focus too much on a technical part, your story will look a little bit like this. We all know how that one ended. So let's talk about the other parts of app development outside of the programming part. I think the programming part of the app is just the tip of the iceberg. It is the part of app building that you can read about online on blogs. It requires some fresh thinking. It requires a whole bunch of design patterns for consistency. But I think it's way more important to think about how your app is going to work from a functional perspective. And we call that the layer of simplification. And in essence, this is the different part from traditional application design when you build applications for Microsoft Dynamics NAV, which is the core foundation for Dynamics 365 financials. On top of simplification, there is the marketing component. How are users going to find your solution and give it a try? And last but not least, if your app is running, if your app is there on AppSource, how are you going to add new features? How are you going to listen to user feedback? And how are you going to grow the community around your app? So that's today's agenda. We'll start by explaining from a bird's eye what it means for developers to build an app for Dynamics 365, but we're also going to explain what it means to add simplification, and also why this is such a crucial component of app building, and we're going to illustrate it in some demos on the live environment. I think the marketing part is what a lot of the TAP participants experienced as the most complex part, because it contains some components that are new even to the most experienced Dynamics NAV partners. The last part we'll talk about is the Lifecycle Management, and this is actually a component where we have the least amount of real-life experience, and that is because as of today only 11 apps are available in the store, and half of them are from Microsoft. But we will share what we think is important from app lifecycle perspective. So the programming part. As I mentioned during the introduction, the programming part is, compared to the other components of app building, the part where we have most knowledge. But there are a few pitfalls to watch out for. The first thing is you have to look at your existing IP. What do you have today? Is this based on a Dynamics NAV add-on? And then maybe you are able to analyze the solution, maybe clean it up in such a way that it may work as an extension. This is what the first apps did that appeared in the store when Microsoft launched the preview. The first apps in the store were Sana and ChargeLogic, and you could see that these apps were actually the core nav components without adding a layer of simplicity. And also this is something that we are doing for a number of NAV partners as we speak. It's a very technical process that has a couple of iterations depending on the complexity of the solution. In a lot of cases, however, it makes a lot more sense to start from scratch. This is true in most cases, more than you think. And I'll explain this in more detail when we go to the next topic of our agenda, which is the simplicity. If your solution is designed in NAV, you have a choice. If your current IP is in NAV, you can clean up or start from scratch. But there are a whole bunch of solutions out there based on Dynamics TP, SL, AX, that don't have the luxury of doing that. And the same is true if you're looking at migrating a solution from NetSuite or Economics or QuickBooks that have a different API. For Dynamics TP partners, I think that the bridge is easier because if you look at the extensions model for financials, it looks familiar, which is probably because a lot of the plumbing is done by GP architects in Fargo, such as Michael Hammond. Also, the functional perspective from that, Microsoft has worked on adding a lot of features to financials that were missing in NAV, but were inspired by GP, such as workflow, deferrals, chart of account categories, and a lot of other features that people love in GP. Partners that currently do NetSuite or Economics or QuickBooks have a slightly higher learning curve, since the API for financials is quite different and requires some fresh thinking. For these partners, it's also hard to figure out what the status of financials is, since Microsoft is actually writing the book as they go, and the development experience, functional app, and API are currently under continuously improvements. So those partners need extra guidance to see the forest through the trees. Currently, the App Alliance is also working together with Dynamics Pro and Microsoft to create functional readiness materials to get everyone on the same page, even if you're not familiar with the core NAV application. So from a technical perspective, Delta files are typically the next thing that developers need to be able to get their head around when they work with apps, as well as the new property application area, which becomes a mandatory property that Microsoft has introduced for NAV 2017. And then from a simplicity perspective, you have to analyze your app and see how many occurrences do I have of error and how many occurrences do I have from test fields, because these programming statements have actually become anti-patterns, since an error or a test field stops people from doing their work without guiding them to an answer, which is important if you program apps. Role center support is currently very limited, but most of the apps which are currently in development, when they are finished, probably role center support will be supported when they are there. And the last part is eventing. Eventing is the new way of doing source code modifications for the base NAV app. And the biggest challenge for a lot of AL developers is to think about the fact that raw source code modifications are no longer allowed. The good news about the technical part is that a lot of that is already covered in readiness materials. On top of the Microsoft Dynamics Learning Portal, where there are dozens of videos, you can go to YouTube. There's videos about extensions, events, Delta files, and other components. We especially recommend the Mebusho channel, where you can find the latest recordings for NAV Tech Days, and of course our own NAV Skills channel. On the Microsoft Design Patterns Wiki, you can already read design patterns on simplicity, notifications, and events, and Microsoft will add new design patterns on a regular basis. As a part of this webinar series, we also plan to do a webinar around simplicity, notifications, and events, and do something around app packaging using PowerShell. However, I think the programming part is not the most challenging part for app architects. It's not in events or extensions where most people will find the biggest challenges. I think the danger lies in simplicity. The reason why simplicity is so important is because the way that people find, evaluate, buy, and start using apps. We are going into a model where people who buy business apps do that when it's a convenient time for them. And with AppSource and Dynamics 365 for financials, it's possible to go to AppSource, click on an app that you want to try, and then on a Sunday afternoon, Monday evening, or maybe in the middle of the night, I mean, whatever time is convenient for you, you can try and evaluate the app. And that means that there is not a consultant sitting next to you when you start having your first experience. Right? So the first experience, the first 5 minutes of wow is very important when working with your app. And this is different from the traditional way of doing NAV, where NAV or AX or GP or any traditional ERP implementation is started with a kickoff meeting with consultants, and consultants are guiding the customer side by side and helping them through the implementation process. The good news is that Microsoft has come up with a whole list of solutions to simplify your application. The first thing they did is they made the good old wizards work in the web client. Wizards have been a long-time member of the Dynamics NAV design pattern family, and they were introduced in Navision Solutions 3.0 a long time ago when we first got the CRM module. They were a little bit forgotten over the years since they were a little bit cumbersome to build in the classic client, and in the first few iterations they were not supported in the web client. However, I think they are a great way to guide users through complicated processes, and financials is loaded with wizards, as we will show in a demo as well. Building wizards also adds to the complexity of your product lifecycle, which I will explain at the end of this webinar. The second tool that Microsoft has given us are notifications, and honestly, this I think is a true gift, since it allows us to do things that were not possible before. They were shipped during the TAP program, and I will explain during the demo what you can do with notifications. Tooltips is a very old property that already existed in very early versions of Navision when it came to the Windows platform, but they were never intensively used until now. The last two elements of simplicity are assisted setup and business assistance, which I will show as well during the demo. All in all, I think it's safe to say that simplicity is not simple. And as Marco Peresic said during one of our meetings, some people get it, and some people just don't. So enough PowerPoint for now. Let's dive into the real thing and see if we can find some of these elements that illustrate what I talk about when we talk about simplicity. So this is the real thing. It says, welcome to Dynamics 365 for Financials. This is the demo Cronus application. I have started it up before starting this webinar, so it has to wake up again. So let's wait a minute until it does that. Microsoft shipped quite a few wizards as part of the application, and most of them can be found in the assisted setup. The assisted setup is kind of a workflow-like thing where people can go and look at the parts of the application that were installed and that were not installed. If you build apps, you can actually add your own assisted setup, and then your assisted setup will show here, like setup ls express or something like that. If I click on one of the assist edits, I can say start setup, and then it will warn me that I've already done this. But then if I go into one of these steps, I go into a wizard. The wizards that you show that Microsoft uses in Dynamics 365 are created like wizards were created a long time ago. They are pages in NAV, and every step in the wizard is a group, and every time you step through a group, one of the groups are set to visible and non-visible. If we close the assisted setup, the next thing I would like to show you is how to work with the tooltips and the business assistance. The tooltips are essentially a little bit of explanation that you get when you hover over one of the actions. This looks very easy for end users, but to build them into your app is quite some work. You have to explain with every action and with every field what a user can do with it. Then we have the business assistance, and the business assistance is basically some guiding for users where you can say, okay, I want to get started with this, like working with journals, and then I can view one of these business assistant things. And then you get a YouTube video which you can embed into the application, and then the wizard and the video will show you how to use this part of the application. Making how do I videos about your app is one of the crucial parts of the marketing part, which I will talk about in a minute. In order to show you the notifications, I'm actually going to do a very dangerous exercise. I'm going to switch companies, which is unfortunately something that when I tried this yesterday, it didn't really work well for me. So let's see what happens if we start that again today. We will just start Dynamics again with a blank company that doesn't have any demo data. So now we have a blank, no we don't. We actually have to completely log out. Thank you demo gods for doing this. So now when I log back into my Office 365 account, you can actually see the real thing. You can see the beautiful Dynamics 365 icon show up. And when I click on that, I get a list of business applications. I apologize for the Dutch language here. And then when I click on the Financials app, I'm guided through Dynamics 365 for Financials. Let's see if we can get the blank app now. So this is a completely blank demo, blank company that I've created. So now if I go to my customers, there are no customers yet in the database. And now I can actually get a notification. And the notification says that it looks like this list is empty. Would you like to import some customers? And I can say, yes, please. And then it goes into a wizard that allows me to import customers. Adding these notifications, adding the wizard, adding the tooltips, adding the YouTube videos, adding the assistant setup is a crucial part of your app. And this is something that even the most sophisticated CFMD and AV solutions currently don't have. And it's a crucial part of building your app. An example of a notification can be that in one of the apps that we've helped building, we added a barcode to the item list. And then what you could think of is that the first time you go to the item list after installing the app, you say, hey, it looks like you don't have any barcodes for your items yet. Do you want to import an Excel sheet with item numbers and barcodes that allow you to use barcodes in your app? So
Mark, we do have one question that has just come in.
Sure.
And that is from Bruno, asking, Dynamics 365 Financials is a web client only. What are the pitfalls for Windows client-concentric developers?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. With Dynamics 365, sorry?
Would you like to answer that now or hold it till later?
Let's hold it till later and then do all the questions at the end. But thanks for giving me the heads up so I can think of an answer while doing the rest of the presentation. So another thing that we learned from the TAP program and from talking to the partners that actually build the apps that you can currently find or almost are finished to build to be in AppSource is, especially if you have current solutions that are quite big, is to start thinking about your solution in smaller modules. And both from a sales perspective and also from a development perspective, it can be quite interesting to start with small applications and allow people to add elements to that people can buy separately if their business grow. This may cause you to have to publish events yourself and to subscribe to your own event as part of having dependency apps. This is technically possible if you go to AppSource. You can find the charge logic apps, and the charge logic apps have dependencies. You cannot use one app if you don't have the core app. People who have attended my workshop may remember that I always use an example for interfaces. Your user only cares about receiving a payment or reading the weight from a weighing scale, and each bank format or each weighing scale manufacturer has their own app as part of the total solution. The good news is that also for this problem there are a lot of great design patterns, such as the discovery event pattern, the handle pattern, and the targeted subscriber pattern. And I really highly recommend watching the NAV Tech Days video from Microsoft about design patterns. I think it's mandatory if you start building apps where Microsoft will explain how to look at your solution with modular components. Don't reinvent the wheel. Your app can leverage existing web services that already are out there, and also look at other technologies like Power Apps and Flow. Power Apps and Flow are very interesting components of the Dynamics 365 family that allow you to do things that are very hard to do in the AL programming language, and look at leveraging those components as part of your total solution. So let's talk a little bit about the marketing part. I'm a little bit outside of my comfort zone as a developer, but I have some great examples, especially from my Icelandic friends that I helped with this. They gave me a lot of great feedback about what they did in order to market their app. I think first and foremost, it's crucial that you don't rely on Microsoft to sell your app. I think this is a very common mistake that people make. When you build an app, and especially when it's a vertical app like LS Express, you are solving a problem that your potential users are experiencing. So that means that when the users are searching for keywords on Google or Bing, the keywords that they search for are not things like Dynamics 365. The keywords are mobile PRS or startup POS or something like that, or child daycare solution or rifle administration or equipment rental for some of the other apps that we're currently helping with. So you should make sure your app has its own landing page, and the landing page that people land on after they have Googled you should give people a happy feeling, and they should get a positive experience about working with you. The great news is that Microsoft actually gives you 30 days of free trial. So people can try and buy your app as part of a trial experience. And you should really use that 30 days to make users stick to your solution. Experience has learned that people give an app about 5 minutes to impress them. We call this the 5 minutes of wow. And videos can really help this experience. Videos can be both on your landing page as well as embedded into your app when people start the trial period. Product feedback and online help are mandatory parts of your app. Your app won't go through validation process if you don't have product feedback and online help. So with the good old CFMD for NAV, you could get away with half an online help. With this, you really want to have proper help, proper videos, and product feedback. So let's again look at an example of one of the TAP partners and see how they have implemented these components. For that, we will go back to Internet and go to the landing page for the LS Express app, which is not in the store yet, but it's almost there. So here you see a landing page that people get on once they have found you. From the landing page, they can go immediately to the to AppSource in order to try it. But they can also go down and say, okay, why should I use this app? What does this app specifically do? How is it going to fix my problems? It has a link to a PDF. It continuously reminds me to start a free trial, and all the page is designed to do is to give me a positive feeling about using this app and to start give it a try. And it even reminds you to try it for free for the first 30 days. So let's see what happens if we give it a free trial. If we give it a free trial, we go to the AppSource page. Here we go to the Microsoft part of the app, and this is basically where Microsoft takes over the responsibility. This is the page that every app will get on AppSource, and here you can actually get the app directly. In this case, it will go to my Dynamics 365 and try to add the app to my role center. But it also shows videos again. It shows a link again to the fact sheet. And here, if I click on one of the videos, it's going to explain again why this app is so great and why I should actually use this app for my business. All this is so crucial because apps are purchased, apps are evaluated without a single phone call to a partner and without a single functional consultant being online. We think that after a while, if people are working with your app for 30 days or for a few months, that they are willing to get some consultancy and to get some help. But especially in the first period, people will try to figure it out themselves. So simplification and marketing are crucial components to be successful with apps in Dynamics 365. So let's talk a little bit about lifecycle management. Let's imagine that you are in AppSource and you have successfully managed to get there and to get into this great program. Then you should start asking yourself questions like, how often do I release? This is not an environment where you can program in a live database if a customer gets an error message. You technically don't even have a debugger anymore, because if a customer runs into an error message, you can't fire up a debugger and go into the code. Remember that every time you update, you have to write upgrade code units. You can't go to SQL Server Management Studio and do a quick script to move data around. You actually have to do the real thing. You have to make sure that if people go from one version of your app to the next version of the app, that they don't lose data. How do they get used to new features? Do they get new videos that explain them which new options that they have in your app? Collecting telemetry is also something which is very important if you have apps. Which part of your apps are currently in use? Microsoft is not giving that to you out of the box for free just yet. So maybe it is a good idea as part of your app to add a table that collects some statistics, and then ask your customers every now and then to send telemetry to you. You can make that part of your app and part of the package. And also, it's very important to use the product feedback. Make sure that you have an excellent product feedback page so that people can actually suggest improvements to your app, and maybe even have an online community where your users can share experiences and talk about the future of their business solution. Then we have the validation process. The validation process is the replacement or the new version of CFMD that Microsoft is going to do with your app, and they're going to look at all of the aspects. There is a lot of information available that explains the validation process. If you go to Microsoft Partner Source, Microsoft has a whole bunch of PDFs available that explain more in technical detail what they will look at. Our experience is that it takes at least 6 months to build an app, and it's very smart to do it with a dedicated team. Don't make this a side job. Especially because you have to add simplicity, you have to add the marketing, you have to create how do I videos. It's not something that you can do on a Sunday afternoon. Just package your existing NAV solution and send it to Microsoft. It will definitely be rejected, and you will actually look a little bit like an idiot if you do it like that. When Microsoft reviews your app, they will actually try to use your app without documentation. So what Microsoft will do is they will install your file, your NavX file, and they will start trying to use it as if they are a user trying the app on a Sunday afternoon. So they are going to try the wizards, they are going to try watching the videos. And it should be possible to use your app without documentation, just as it should be possible for users to start using the app without thinking about it. A last part to think about is service level agreement. Which countries are you going to serve? Currently, Dynamics 365 is available in North America. The next countries will be in Europe. If your app is available in both continents, how are you going to make sure that if a user needs help, that you're going to give support to the East Coast, West Coast, and all of the different time zones that your app is going to be used in. Remember that your customers will not be in a circle around your headquarters anymore. Customers can pop up from all over the globe, depending on where Dynamics 365 is available. Then I think the million-dollar question that a lot of partners have at the moment: how do I charge for my app? How do I make sure I get money? Because I'm going to invest a lot of time in this. A lot of resources are going to go into this. And currently, Microsoft is not providing a payment platform. It doesn't mean that you cannot get paid. Actually, I think if you look in my heart, I think it's actually not bad, because the app, in essence, from a Microsoft perspective, is free. Microsoft is not taking 10, 20, or 25%. And you can actually do it yourself. You can build in something into your app that gets you your money, that gets you credit card information, or something that allows you to do billing. And remember that your AL source is closed, right? So no one can get to your source code. So you can actually build in a web service that checks if the customer has paid their invoice. And it is not really that hard to build in something that blocks your app from being used if a customer cancels their credit card. You will also get billing information from Microsoft. As soon as you click on an app, Microsoft will ask permission to send information from that user to the app owner. And the good news is that currently there are a couple of large partners in Europe and North America looking at offering the payment services completely outsourced. So don't worry about not charging for your app. I think there's a couple of really good solutions out there. And also remember that in the previous slide I said it will take at least 6 months to build your app. So that means if you are working on building your app today, that in 6 months there will be multiple solutions to get money, to get your app running from a business perspective, your business in this case. So finding help, of course, we give a lot of information for free. We will do an entire webinar series, but if you need help on top of all of our free stuff that we're giving away, we think we can categorize the partners that need help into at least 3 parts. You may be a Navision ISV with existing IP, and you just need help with extensions and simplification. Maybe you are doing GP, SL, or NetSuite, or QuickBooks, and you see all of this cool stuff, and you want to get on board of this train. Or you are an online service like Avalara or someone else, and you really don't care about the business logic or the AL programming language or all the technical bits and pieces. You just want it to work, right? Functional app training is something that we do in combination with the Dynamics Pro organization. We do fixed price technical guiding and training. We can completely outsource your app if you want. We have a team of 25 developers in Europe that are ready to build your apps. We can help you with live management services, and we can help you with the marketing validation assistance. On top of that, we're going to give a lot of stuff away for free. We think the true value is not in the technical part. We're going to give a lot of examples of wizards and notifications and PowerShell scripts away for free. Design patterns, Microsoft News, and we're actually going to give access to example apps and webinars. We have a couple of webinars listed coming up already. The first webinar in January will be a functional deep dive led by Andrew Good, where we will have our expert panel. Some of you may have attended our first webinar when Project Madeira was just launched, when we had a couple of MVPs giving their opinion about the application, and that's what we're going to repeat now that the first real thing has been shipped. Then we're going to tell you everything about notifications and wizards, what you learned to do about that. Charging and collecting telemetry is something that we're going to do in March. Then we're going to deep dive in app packaging, the PowerShell stuff in April. And then hopefully by May or June, Microsoft has a roadmap on what the next versions of Dynamics 365 for financials will be. So I think now it is time to answer some of those questions. See if we can get them answered. If we can't, We will publish the questions and answers on our blog. You can see a couple of pictures here of our team. We have offices in US and Europe. We have office in Denmark, an office in Holland, and an office in Ukraine. And here you can find my contact details. So Andrew, do you have some questions?
We do have a few questions. Starting out with where we started when I asked you the first question. So in Dynamics 365 Financials, is it web client only? And what are the pitfalls for a Windows client-concentric developer?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. If you look at the telemetry for traditional NAV implementations, a lot of people stick to the good old Windows client, and not for bad reasons. Until NAV 2017, there were a lot of things that were not yet working in the web client. But the good news is that Microsoft solved a lot of these issues, right? So a lot of the issues that we had with the web client are no longer valid, like being able to use wizards was something that didn't work in the web client. Also, you need to think about your user interface from a simplicity perspective. And our experience is that the UI for financials is typically a little bit different than the traditional NAV UI. And if you think about your UI from a perspective of it needs to be intuitive, and there is not a functional consultant watching over the shoulder of the user, you're going to look at your UI in a different way anyway. If you have specific questions about specific types of controls, please send an email to my email address. And what I typically do with questions like these is that I answer them in blog format, right? So if you ask me a question, I'll blog about it, and then everyone gets the answer.
All right. So Mark, the next question we have is from Eric, and he is asking, can you tell us about the licensing options? Are apps basically always free? As an ISV, do we have to add our own modules to VARs and or customers and partner source? Does Microsoft take care of the billing, or is this done by the VAR? So as we've gone through, we've answered some of those questions.
I think we should have answered this one. So Microsoft doesn't charge for it. It's free from a Microsoft perspective. So everyone can click on an app and start using it. And it is your own responsibility to A, send an invoice, and B, prevent your app from being used if the invoice is not paid.
And one of the other questions that came up was regarding sort of the Clicktrybuy approach to apps, and something that's fundamentally different with Dynamics 365 versus on-prem nav is, why would you try an app in the live environment?
Yeah, and I think this is a common misconception as well. If you look at how Microsoft is positioning Dynamics 365, a lot of people have the idea that people are going to first try Dynamics 365 and then add apps. But I think if in a lot of cases, like if you have vertical apps, then people who have the challenge of finding a POS or finding an app that helps them handle their child daycare business, they will search for a solution, and that solution just happens to run on Dynamics 365. And in a lot of cases, they will already have Office 365. So it's going to be very easy and very familiar for them to start adding it. But especially having vertical apps, I think the expectation from Microsoft is not people finding them via AppSource on existing subscriptions, but to use those apps to actually sell the app itself. It's a little bit different from components. If you look at LANM address verification or maybe ChargeLogic or the Navex search app. Those are little gizmos that you can add on top of your existing solution. And if you like to try if finding addresses work for you, you can try it. If you don't like it, you throw it away. So I think it's a difference between vertical apps and horizontal apps.
All right, so we'll move to the next question. And is there a way to figure out which part of NAV 2017 is being used for Dynamics 365 offering? I'd like to just make a comment, and then Mark, you can continue on with this. The stated position for Microsoft is the functionality from the NAV Starter Pack. So those of you that are NAV partners will understand what the Starter Pack is. But the functionality from the NAV Starter Pack will be rolling into the Dynamics 365 financials, and the current intention is the functionality in the extended pack will not be rolled out as part of Dynamics 365 financials. Yep. Mark, did you have any comments there?
Yeah, so finding out which application areas are used is actually quite easy. If you download the NAV 2017 product, Microsoft introduced a new property called Application Area. And if you go to Company Information in NAV 2017, you will have a new tab called User Experience. And if you change that value to Basic or Suite, NAV 2017 will turn into Dynamics 365 mode. And you see exactly what is used in Dynamics 365 financials and what is not. That's the functional way of finding out. The technical way is to look at the property application area. The property application area is implemented everywhere in an NAV application, and it will explain to you exactly which parts of NAV are currently part of 365 and which parts are not. You have to be a little bit careful when you change the user experience to basic, because you can't change it back from the company information. You have to actually go to the application area page to switch it off. But you can find information about that on my blog if you want.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Just want to jump into. How do you resolve potential conflicts between two or more apps that are installed? And really, how do you actually prevent conflicts as you're going through your architecture, design, and build?
Well, actually, the limitations that come for free with extensions solve most of that. So the extension model, which is the mandatory shipping model for Dynamics 365, already solves a lot of potential conflicts. And on top of those conflicts that the extension framework fix, Microsoft makes it mandatory if you create a new table or create any new object to prefix your names. So if you want to add a table that is, for example, transport management setup, it has to have a 3-letter abbreviation in front of it. And the restrictions and best practices that come with building apps for Dynamics 365 actually makes it so transparent that you can actually have two apps that functionally try to solve the same issues and run them side by side, right? So that's actually solved in extensions framework, and on top of that, with some additional restrictions that Microsoft put on top of that.
Okay, we have another couple of questions, but they're actually related, so I'm going to combine them into one.
Yeah, we also have to wrap up, so I would like to suggest that this is the last question, or maybe two more questions.
Yes, yeah, we will wrap up after this question and the next. There are a couple of additional questions, and we'll respond to those after we wrap up the webinar. The question is regarding object ID ranges. There was a question about rules about object ID ranges, and then that falls into if we have existing IP within nav of our own, and we have to develop the Dynamics 365 apps in the 70 million range. So do we have to actually maintain two separate code bases from this point on?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and the answer is yes and no. And that basically depends on how far do you want to differentiate your 365 offering from your core NAV offering. Last Friday I was doing some consulting for a Dutch company, and for that specific scenario, we actually figured out that the whole simplification story for the Dynamics 365 would also be very useful for their NAV customers. So in that specific situation, we probably end up with the same app for NAV and the same app for Dynamics 365. And then you can simply download a renumber tool from Webuso or from Objects4Nav and use the renumber tool every time you're finished with your development to switch between your CFMD license and your Dynamics 365 license. If your Dynamics 365 app is going to be substantially different from your core NAV app, which may be bigger or don't have the simplicity, then your problem is bigger than just a license, right? You can maybe still share modules or share code units, but then I would look into more sophisticated build solutions than just trying to figure out to run the same objects on different licenses, which is an easy one.
Yeah. So Mark, we're down to our last question that we'll be taking today. And the question is, regarding your reference to 6 months to get an app ready to sell, does that include the time for development, or is it just Microsoft's time to validate it? What's the thinking behind the 6 months?
Yeah, so the 6 months is based on the experience that I got as feedback from the people in the TAP program. Most of the apps from TAP started end of spring time frame, and were developed across the summer period. And then they ran into the complexity that Microsoft was writing the validation book as they went along. I have a couple of really nice beer stories that are not suitable for recorded webinars. And based on that feedback and based on where the apps in the TAP program are now, we are kind of experiencing that taking 6 months should be a good time frame to look at your existing AP, simplify it, test it, make marketing materials, make YouTube videos, go through the validation process, which by now is more laid out than it was half a year ago. So that's kind of, and probably you can build easier, simpler apps in a few months. You have to take maybe a longer period for more complicated apps. But I would definitely not, if you think your app will take more than 6 months, I would look into making it into a smaller module first, because the world just changes too much in 12 months.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. That does wrap up the questions. There was one question asked that we'll follow up with after the webinar. Please join us again next month as we have our panel discussion about Dynamics 365 and do our deep dive.
Thank you.